Hello and welcome to tonight's program. I'm your host, Charles Jenkins, and I want to talk to you about human trafficking. January is National Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And think about this next question. Texas is ranked number 2 in the country, only to California, in human trafficking. Bell County is one of the most trafficked counties in the state. Think about that. Bell County is one of the most trafficked counties in the state. And if you're wondering where Bell County is, it's the county I'm bringing you this message from tonight. Tonight, we will be addressing the issue because together as a community, we can make a difference and your help is needed. If you're wondering, how can I help? Trust me, your help is needed. You will be hearing tonight 2 painful stories. One of a survivor and one is the mother whose child didn't make it. Human trafficking is basically modern day slavery. It is the exploitation of men, women, and children for forced labor or sex by a third party. Texas is on the forefront of combating this hideous crime. In 2016, one of his first major initiatives by Attorney General Paxson formed the Human Trafficking and Transitional Organized Crime Section, better known as HTTOC, tasked with combating human trafficking across our state. And this information I'm bringing you, you can find from the website at https://www.texasattorneygeneral.gov initiatives, human trafficking. And I told you about our 2 stories tonight. The first one is one of a survivor. Pay attention to what she says. You can hear different things for your kids that can prevent them from being trafficked.
I'd like you to just start at the beginning and share how you were drawn into human trafficking.
I was 13 years old. I was raised here in Killeen. I met at a park with a friend, and she went to meet up with a guy, and I didn't want her to go by herself, so I went with her. And we got there and we hung out for a little bit, and then I just decided to step out because they're boyfriend and girlfriend, I guess. And when I went back in after a while, there were 4 men in there and she wasn't there anymore. And that day I was raped by those 4 men. It was really scary, and I didn't know what was gonna happen after that. But eventually I was able to go back home, like they just left me there. And they left me alone for a while after that, and a little while after that they told me to meet them at the park. And I did, and they took me somewhere else, like another house. And that's when I got my number. Getting your number is a certain amount of people you have to be with, or else they'll hurt you or beat you or whatnot. And my number was 12. So whenever I had to go, I had to do that number, or else something was gonna happen. And that went on for a while, 5 years. And in those years, a lot of things happened. Like, I didn't leave because I was scared. I was really scared. They threatened my family, they threatened me. And the threats weren't empty. Like, they would do things in front of you so that you wouldn't say anything. Like, they would hurt other girls, beat them. And it was scary to watch, so I didn't want that to be myself. So I stayed quiet. I did reach out for help a few times, and I didn't get far because I didn't give a lot of information because I was scared. The houses that we would go to, they were normal houses from the inside. I don't know what they look like from the outside. So it just felt like we were in a normal place, but we only saw the inside of the room sometimes. And sometimes we would be in the room with another person and there would still be guys coming in.
And you were beating yourself in front of other girls? And
Sometimes, like if I didn't do what they said, like they would make up rules on spot and it was now a rule, but you didn't know that rule existed until then.
They kept you off balance.
Yes. You could follow all the rules you knew, but if you didn't do something and you didn't know it was a rule, it was over.
And you are from the Central Texas area. What ages of girls did you see being trafficked?
I saw girls from 10 to 17. They looked that age at least. And depending on what house you went to is the amount of girls who were there or what ages were there.
You mentioned that they allowed you to go home that first day. Was that the case for everyone, or?
No. I went home every time after like they knew my parents' schedule, so I was home before my parent was. And other girls, they didn't get to go home. I don't know why they didn't get to go home, but sometimes they would be stuck there, like at the house. And you can tell because a lot of them relied on them for food and whatnot. And if they didn't meet their number or whatever they told them to do, they wouldn't eat or they wouldn't get to do stuff like basic needs.
But you never knew if they were going to stop you from going back home, so that was more intimidation.
I never knew if I was going to get to go home or if I was going to make it out alive that day.
Was there ever a situation where someone didn't make it out alive?
There were a few. Those were the harder times to remember, to talk about, because those are someone's kids. And it could be for little things like she screamed or she cried when someone was with her, and then they would come in there and they would hurt her. And sometimes they didn't make it out the room alive if they were really angry.
How did you cope at home with this going on and having to go back and forth?
I didn't have healthy coping methods, but for me, I pretended everything was normal. And I pretended it wasn't happening in my head so that I could deal with it better. Like I just tried to live as normal as possible, but I was hiding so much. Like I was the kid who wore sweatsuits in the summer because there was nothing else I could do.
Did you have problems in school, thought process? How did it affect you?
I had problems concentrating in school, but I was also that kid who liked going to school because that was the safe spot for me. My grades were okay for the most part. I wasn't failing, and I had a lot of help from other students. You know what I mean?
Must have been terrible and difficult through the whole thing. When did you begin to feel that you could make an attempt to communicate with someone to get out? How did that come about?
I would sometimes I would say little things and sometimes people wouldn't pick up on it, and then eventually some people started listening to me, and I did go to the police department, and I didn't get very far because I didn't say much. At the time I was scared. I was scared of the police officers, so I didn't say much, and that was on me. So I didn't get out then.
How did you ultimately get out?
I joined the Army, and I left. You see them in uniform, so I wanted to do it, and that got me far enough from it.
That's incredible. It's an incredible story. How is all of this, what's going on in your life now with all of this?
I still deal with it a lot. Like, it's not gone away now that I'm out of it. You still deal with it on a daily basis, if not more than before, because it's always in your head. But I try to help other girls now, like work with kids so they can spot the signs. And if there's signs, you say something. You be there for them the entire way.
Was it hard for your family to become aware? Was it hard for you that when your family became aware?
Yes, in the most part, kind of. It's hard to talk about it with family because it's a hard topic for anyone.
Mm-hmm. It is. It is. Well, thank you for your testimony, for your story.
Thank you.
After watching that, all I can say is, wow. Right here in our own backyard. As the father of two girls, to young girls, the first thing come to mind is disbelief. But whether I believe it or not, you just heard a survivor tell her story, and it's frightening. Right under her parents' roof, we didn't know the signs. Parents, listen to your children. Our first guest tonight is Miss Kathy Ulustalo. She's the director of Arc to Freedom. Hello and welcome to today's show.
Thank you for having me, Charles.
Yes, and Kathy, after seeing that video, what thoughts cross your mind?
She's an amazing, courageous young woman to be willing to share her story and that story of courage and of hope to others who are caught in the life, that there is hope and that there are agencies here locally to help them.
And speaking of local agencies, I know Director of Arc to Freedom. So just jump right into human trafficking in general and tell us about just trafficking here in Central Texas.
Here in Central Texas, we've identified between the years of 2015 and 2017 over 87 individuals who were likely victims of sex trafficking. And 2 of those happen to be boys. And so we do want the public to understand that it's not just girls affected, but boys. Boys just exhibit differently. Also, we're identifying additional victims on a regular basis, and we're working as a Central Texas Domestic Minor Sex Trafficking Roundtable to have more partners have the ability to report and have those statistics recorded and have more up-to-date information for the public.
You know, and when people think of this, they think, oh, it's happening in other countries. Oh, it has nothing to do with Taken, but for some reason people always go back to the movie Taken.
Right.
First, before you answer anything I just said, tell us a little bit about Arc to Freedom and its mission.
Okay. The Arc to Freedom mission is to reduce supply and demand of human trafficking here domestically in the Central Texas region. We're a 501c3. We are a division of Hope for the Hungry here in Belton, Texas.
Okay. And how long have you been there?
I've been with Hope for the Hungry. We've been a division since December 2017, but I've been on this fight for about 2.5 years, since October of 2016.
So back to what I was saying earlier, why do so many people have that misconceived notion that it happens overseas and not here in our backyard?
Well, honestly, I think it's a little more comfortable to think of it as overseas. And it takes some courage to admit that it's here, that it's here local, and that our kids are vulnerable to it.
And as from watching that video, we saw personally that it truly happens here in our own backyard. What are some signs of people being trafficked?
Well, things to watch for, especially just to give a quick one-phrase generalization, would be any changes in behavior or appearance, such as they suddenly have new accessories, things that may not align with their family income, things that are much more expensive, or they're traveling where the family may not be able to travel. Other things might be they have an older boyfriend or girlfriend. They might be leaving their normal support system to hang out with one person. Are any one of those things a definite sign that trafficking is going on? No. But when they're in combination with one another, it's worth asking more questions.
That's good. And why is it important to listen to your kids?
We almost have to listen between the lines, don't we? We have to listen and then listen some more.
Yes.
A training I went to recently suggested that we ask open-ended questions, which we're not usually accustomed to doing.
Yes.
But ask those open-ended questions and listen to the whole story.
Who's at risk?
Well, we're all at risk if you think about it. We all have something that we want or feel we need that we don't have. So that's all it takes is to, and not necessarily exactly that in the survivor story that we just heard, but if we need something or want something, the trafficker can step in, pretend to fill that need, and pretend that they're our knight in shining armor. And so that's something that we often call boyfriending or girlfriending.
And I heard from the video, she says some of the girls were 10 to 17. And that, it just strikes fear. I know I have trust in the Lord, but fear comes, and man, 10 to 7, that's the age of my youngest, 10.
Yeah.
And just to think that's going on in junior high schools and high schools around Central Texas. If someone watching tonight and wanting to know, how can I get involved? How can I get trained? How can I volunteer? What would you tell them?
Well, we have over 75 organizations in the Domestic Minor Sex Trafficking Roundtable.
Wow.
We shorten that to say CTDMST to make it a little more easier to get out. But we have over 75 organizations that not all of them are open to having volunteers, but most are. And Arc to Freedom, we have volunteer groups for advocacy and investigations online, and for training in the schools and the public, and also outreach teams to go do street outreach and in the prisons. And so there are a lot of ways that people can get involved volunteering, but more than anything, being eyes and ears.
Yeah.
If they see something that seems fishy, a tattoo on a young child, or any of these signs, and they can look for more signs on the Attorney General's website, Texas Attorney General Human Trafficking. If they Google that or search that online, they can find a whole list of indicators to help as well. And there's also a great video called Be the One that the Attorney General has put out that will help them see more indicators. And
back to the video, our survivor said something. She wore sweatpants in the summer. That is definitely something, if I saw more than one time, I would be asking my kid, why are you wearing sweatpants in the summer? See, we think it's these big old signs, and it could be little signs right underneath our nose. We have to be vigilant.
Yes.
And as a father, that's why it's so important to be involved in your children's lives. And I know it happens to boys, but I don't have boys, I have girls. And to ask questions and to be those listening ears and to do things with them that it's just in times like these, we just need to be vigilant, whether men, women, boys, girls, especially with our children. Is there anything else you want to add or talk about in regards to trafficking here in Bell County? Is there anything you want to say to people who think this doesn't happen in Bell County, right under our noses?
Well, it's definitely here. We can't avoid it any longer. We need to equip our kids. At this stage in the situation, keeping it away from public knowledge, not acknowledging it ourselves, keeping our kids away from knowing about it, could actually be causing more harm. It's a delicate balance. We don't want to destroy our kids' innocence by telling them about these things, this evil in the world, but we have to gauge, do we want to educate our kids and equip them at the risk of, or if we avoid doing those things, are we actually causing a risk for someone else to steal that innocence from them in a much more sinister way? But I do definitely want people to know that if they see something, say something, call the national hotline. That number is 888-3737-888. They can make a report there. Call local law enforcement. If it's not an emergency, they can still call and say, I suspect sex trafficking, or I suspect trafficking of any kind.
That's good.
And even if they can't start opening a case, they've promised me they start looking into it.
Wow. And before your time is up, tell us a little bit more about that video you talked about earlier on the website.
The Texas Attorney General's Be the One video is a video that has 3 different survivor stories in it. And it's an inspiring, very well made video to show what it's like in the life and what common people have done to intervene in the situation. It shows very clearly what we are to watch for, what we can do about it. You know, I want all of our audience to know they are empowered to do something about this. We don't have to sit back and just let it happen. We can do something about it.
Thank you. And on that note, let's just go right into seeing what's on the video so you can see it for yourself.
So this is the house that I was kept in for 10 years, 8 of the 10 years. And this is Elnita's house, my neighbor that saved me. As the Bible speaks of, love thy neighbor like you love yourself, and that's what she did for me. So if it had not been for Elnita Hamilton, I would probably be dead today. I would probably be dead today. How he kept me for 10 years is beating, rape, threat of killing me and burying me in the backyard and somebody not knowing where I'm at. If you leave, I'll find you. You can't get away from me. Your mama didn't want you. Your mama sold you to me. Nobody wants you, nobody cares about you. All those years, 10 years, that's all I heard. And you have to understand, I heard that from my mama too.
They don't have a positive relationship in their entire life. There is no one for them to reach out to. I mean, at least they think that, right? They believe that.
Human trafficking is really about the dynamics of the exploiter with the victim.
But I wasn't chained up. I was chained in my mind though, as far as the fear. I was raped on a regular basis, told what to do, when to do, how to do, and if I did not get beat and raped.
The question is building that relationship. Do you care about them as an individual? When that person knows that you love them for who they are, then that gives them the ability to share with you things that they wouldn't otherwise share.
And Elnita was persistent with asking, how am I today? Are you okay today? What Elnita offered me to get out that situation was friendship. First it came friendship. Well, first she built a relationship with helping me to trust her. If I trust you and you don't want anything from me, I'm gonna tell you everything. I will spill everything. I will tell it on everybody. And so I was taking out the trash and she was getting in her car to go to work. And she asked me, was I okay? I told her, you know, I looked around, make sure he wasn't there, and then I told her I needed help. I needed help. Girls like me are kept. It's happening in your backyard and right next door to you. And you cannot ignore it. You can't ignore it. Somebody's life depends on you.
Hello again. Earlier we talked about the survivor. Now we have the mother of a child who didn't survive. Her name is Ms. Janice Charles. She's the Assistant Director of Arc to Freedom. And we have Ms. Constance Fletcher. She's the pastor of Liberty Chapel AME Church, and she's also the CEO of New Covenant Coalition, Inc. Hello, ladies, and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Janice, let's just start with you. Just share your story with us.
Okay, so I'm the mother of Natalie Fisher. Natalie was recruited in her freshman year of high school. I didn't know that was what was going on. She just was in trouble at school a lot, skipping, and never had trouble at home. She didn't sneak out the windows or go out. She never even went on a date. So there was just a lot of trouble at school. And so she got pregnant in school, and she had her baby, and she also had truancy charges. So the judge let us withdraw her and put her in an online school. And then she started sneaking out the back door and coming in at all hours of the night. And she went to Job Corps. We couldn't figure out what is going on with you. We had her in counseling. She was hospitalized a couple of times. I mean, we tried everything we could think of to help her get her life straight. And so she went to Job Corps, and she was there about two and a half months. And she got, they put her on the bus at 2 in the morning. And she told me from Job Corps she was going to go to Dallas. That she had met someone in Job Corps, and her brother was going to help her get a job and a GED, and you know, her driver's license. Her life was going to be great. And a couple of weeks later, she called me and she told me she was pregnant again. So she came home. She was home a week, and she left. A cab pulled up and she took off. And I remember I had taken her to the pregnancy center, and someone there asked me, "Have you ever heard of trafficking?" And I said, "No." And so I think that's when things started getting, you know, kind of making some sense to me. And she was trafficked from that point about 1.5 years, and she was taken from many, into many states. She called me in July and said that she had her pimp arrested, and that if he found her, he was going to kill her. And she didn't know where she was. And so, you know, I stayed on the phone with her, and we got her to a safe place. We got her home, and he got out in 9 days. 9 days after that, he had her again and put her back on the circuit. I mean, he threatened her life. And I called the police and told them, "She's gone, and he has her." And they said, "She's over 18, no one kicked your walls, nobody broke your doors down. She left on her own." And I said, "Physically maybe, but mentally no." And they said there was nothing they could do because she was 18. And so she was gone until early part of October, October. And then she had her baby, and the agreement was she would leave when she had the baby. And she left when the baby turned a month old. And from that day forward, she was trying to get her pimp out of trouble from having him arrested. And she was never going to be able to do that. And they found her body September 23rd, 2016 in Houston.
Thanks for your boldness, for coming on today, sharing the story.
Thank you.
If you would, share some of your frustrations, and what are some things you would tell other parents?
My frustration was that she was 18, and there was absolutely nothing that anyone can do unless that person is screaming, "Help me, help me," and they're not going to do that. Also, I guess another frustration I had is this is where awareness is so important in education. I had no idea what trafficking was, so I didn't understand her mood swings. And you know, I would talk to her, and she was Natalie, and she wanted to come home, and she would ask about her girls. And the next time I would talk to her, "Leave me alone. I'm done with you people." And it was an emotional roller coaster, and that was very frustrating, very heartbreaking.
Pastor Fletcher, as a member of this community, share your perspective on trafficking.
Oh my, well, when I first heard Janice's story, I didn't realize all of the things that were going to come flooding in from my own childhood. My mom had been abused as a child, and it was just basically me and her, my brother against the world, at when she was finally able to get away from her abuse. Her abuse was domestic violence. And unfortunately, me being the rebellious teenager, I did find myself in some situations where I easily could have been taken on a number of occasions. I'll never forget one incident where I almost was. If it wasn't for a bus driver that saw what was happening, I dare say that I might have been in the life. He whipped the bus around and snatched me up and got me home. And so, fast forward, when we arrived in Texas, actually, it started in Massachusetts. We had just come back from overseas, and someone had tried to snatch my daughter. She came running into the house saying someone had tried to get her off her bicycle. And that was when I began to not take certain things for granted. I wasn't sure what to do or who to talk to, but I knew that coming from a history of abuse, that I had to guard her in every way possible. And so, moving from Massachusetts to Texas, we were in Copper's Cove. She shared a couple of times when they almost got her there. And it wasn't her alone, it was friends, you know, and I became, I guess the red flags were going up everywhere, and I remember seeing this young woman, young girl. It was a hot Texas day, and there she was, pushing this baby stroller that had no umbrella. It was just her and the baby, and she looked very panicky. And I was on the bus. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew something was wrong. And right then and there, again, all the memories came flooding back of the abuse, and I said, what is happening to our young girls? I started seeing more of them walking the streets, and I said, that's it. I talked to some coworkers, and they convinced me that, yes, it would be a good time to start the coalition and to set up a network where young girls or women who didn't have anywhere to go, anyone to talk to, would be able to basically just pick up the phone and say, I need such and such. Can you help me?
And speaking of the coalition, that's the New Covenant.
The New Covenant Coalition Incorporated, yes.
Wow. Thank you, too, for just being bold to come on and share your story. And both of you guys, it sounds like both of you are just actively involved right now in the organizations you work with. Share a little bit about that, Ms. Janice.
Well, I cannot keep my mouth shut because I want everyone to know about Natalie. I don't want this to happen to anyone else. So I share my story every chance I get, share Natalie's story every chance I get. And, you know, like I said earlier, education and awareness, and I just don't want this to happen to anyone else.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, I'm very active since it's a family organization. I was connected with the Arc to Freedom through another friend who worked with the Boys and Girls Club. And I've been trying to learn more about trafficking ever since. We did come to realize, however, that when it comes to the girls and women of color, that their trauma is a little different. And so I've put together a book. It's an interesting book. It's a journey of girls, women of color who have been traumatized, not necessarily just from human trafficking, but domestic violence. And so hopefully it will become a resource for women of color who even though they get out of the life, there's a lot of other cultural issues involved that requires them to build some resiliency so that they do not find that returning to the life is a better choice.
What's the name of the book? And where can people
The name
get
of
it?
the book is Sorrow Speak and Spirit Song. And it's a journey. It's an artistic, it's a literary and a musical journey.
Wow.
And it tells a lot of different women's stories in different ways. We didn't want to use names, nothing like that. So we kept everything private, and I reinterpreted their stories into creative venues.
Anything I didn't mention that you just want to share with parents, maybe watching us today? Just anything you want to share.
Educate yourself and listen to your kids. Pay attention.
What about the community? What would you say to a community where this is happening right now under our noses? How can the community take action?
Well, to tell you the truth, I find that the community is basically so busy living their lives from day to day that unless someone really grabs their attention about something, they're not really going to jump in. So I would see the best route being the leaders in the community, the churches, all the social service organizations, setting up trainings and information sessions and discussions and inviting the public, just keeping it out there so that it's unavoidable.
Definitely getting into schools.
Definitely. Yes.
We're going to cut back to the video from the Attorney General's office where the woman sees a problem in Madisonville.
What's interesting about the Madisonville case and how one person can make a difference. One citizen of Madisonville reached out to law enforcement because she saw something that disturbed her. She saw what she believed was a young child, a young girl getting assaulted.
Carrie Rose saw something that she saw didn't look right, and her first thought was, I don't know if this is anything, so I won't say anything.
I was getting ready to turn right onto my road, and I noticed a really high-end Mercedes. So when I drove past, I noticed that there was a young blonde girl. She's screaming, "Help me, help me, like help me." She's screaming like I could hear her. And so I was so shook up that I pulled over and I called 911, and by this time they did pull out into traffic. They were going towards 45. And so I just called and I said, I don't know what I just witnessed, but you have to come fast. There's a Mercedes, they're headed towards 45, and they're holding someone against their will. You know, at first I was like, I don't know what I just witnessed, but it took me 10 seconds to be like, I have to be that person's voice.
This was a basic case of a 33-year-old approximately female here in Madisonville that was literally running a brothel on a nice quiet residential street. She was had supplying drugs, supplying a roof over people's heads, supplying food to numerous transient and homeless females coming through the Houston area and on a circuit. And one of those such females was a child in which she had been literally grooming into prostitution since this girl was 12 years old. In fact, her mother, the girl's mother, introduced her to Jennifer Kelly. And Jennifer Kelly taught her prostitution, literally became her best friend, had a photo of her above her headboard in her bedroom of the child, and the child even got her name tattooed on her.
Jennifer was the Madisonville pimp.
And she's sitting in prison this day because of the actions of one person. Literally 2 children were saved. Human trafficking.
You know, I had the prosecutor sit across from me today. And at the end of our conversation, he looked at me and he said, because of that phone call and because I was willing, that I saved 2 girls' lives that day. You think about it happening in your neighborhood, on your street, when you witness something like I witnessed that day, it changes you. It changes everything.
Hello and welcome back. Our conversation continues. We'll be talking with Ms. Kathy Ulastalos, who's the director of Arc to Freedom again, and Mr. Dan Kirkley, who's on the Belton City Council, and he's the founder of Hope for the Hungry. Hello again and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kathy and Dan, as we can see, this is a big problem nationwide, worldwide, but Texas and Central Texas is getting organized. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Well, Arc to Freedom is a member of the Central Texas Domestic Minor Sex Trafficking Roundtable. There's that mouthful again. And I have the privilege of being the chairperson of the Training and Education Subcommittee. And so I work very close in cooperation. And Dan is also a member of the Roundtable and very active. Okay. And so the Roundtable is made up of over 75 organizations, as I did mention briefly earlier. And those organizations include law enforcement, prosecution, survivor services, counselors, teachers, administrators, from just all walks of life, community people, businessmen, businesswomen, all working together to pool resources and energy to fight human trafficking locally.
Dan, you had any thoughts you want to add to that?
I would indeed, because as Kathy has said, our communities are very much involved. It's exciting for me to know that our law enforcement agencies are involved as well. Highway Patrol, Texas Rangers, Youth Services Bureau. It's an incredible, both nonprofit, Christian ministry, and law enforcement agencies coming together for an enterprise that's very, very dark, and as we've noticed this evening, very hidden under our very noses. And so we understand that this war is hell, and that it's called all of us together to understand, comprehend, and fight the fight.
That's awesome. And and speaking of community, tell us from your perspective, how can the community get involved from your perspective?
Good. I think one of the things that Kathy's talked about and we'll talk about again in a little while is the way we approach that, and I'll discuss that about men in a minute if you want, but to say that there are things that we all observe and there are numbers that we can call. If we see something that's dramatic and tragic, or that we even have guesses about, we can dial 911 and report what we've seen in the location. Make sure we do that. Also, there's the national hotline, which is the 888-373-7888 that we can call with any suspicion whatsoever. All of us can be involved from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Why does it take all of us being involved?
Because it's a huge problem. It's not that human trafficking hasn't existed, but with pornography and some of the other things that are occurring and activities that have generated more of that, we've become much more aware of it, and it's much more prevalent.
Well, and if you look at the top money makers, it's way up there.
It's number 2 worldwide now that has replaced, I think, arms, but is second only to drugs in world income.
And Kathy, speaking of those resources, tell us a little bit about, I know you talk about all the organizations that's involved. How's that been? I mean, are people, even people in the organizations, are their eyes being open?
Absolutely. We've trained over 900 people in the last year.
Wow.
over 150 of those were students. And the training goes on within the roundtable as well and within the subcommittees. But the organizations are learning more about what it is, and one of our leaders, she likes to say we're all shooting from the hip. We're learning as we go, but the cooperation has just been really exciting, and the forward momentum, and even the recognition that we've received from the Attorney General's office and the Governor's office for the progress that we're making as a region and with the roundtable. It's been very exciting. We're working on, some of our progress has been data sharing and getting a system where multiple agencies can share their data together. And then training even for our agencies, law enforcement and other agencies that work directly with victims.
I feel weird calling you by your first name. My mom wouldn't be too happy with me. But I know you're busy doing a lot of other things. Why get involved with this?
Sure. Charles, one of the things when Candy, my wife, and I started Hope for the Hungry 36 plus years ago was in my life, in growing up in Bell County, was what Jesus said in Luke chapter 12, verse 48, when he said, "To whom much is given, much is required." And for us to come to this stage in the development of where we are in our war against human trafficking, and to see the various curricula that have been produced that are marvelous for very young children, for high school age young men and women, and for adult men and women. One of the ones that we have produced locally is called DMST 101, how these 800 and 900 people that Kathy has trained over the last year to look, to see, to report, so that we can in fact battle it even more significantly. So it's been a challenge for me personally and my family, because like you said, I've got 2 kiddos. And when I think of one of my children going through what Natalie Fisher went through, Janice's daughter went through at her age, I'm ready to combat that and to say to fathers, daddies, look up. It's time that we took an interest where we have before assumed that everything's okay in my house with my babies.
Well, it sure spoke to me, especially hearing both stories, the survivor and Pastor's story and Janice's story. It really has opened my eyes to, I thought I was doing enough, but I'm not doing enough. Is you always can do more. And the number one thing is just listening, man, to your kids. Whether you believe what they're saying or not, just listen, because you can discern what's good and what's not.
And you know, it's also incredibly important for us as men to understand, yes, there are women involved in the trafficking mechanisms, but it's a man's world, this dark, dark world. And so in my strong opinion, as men, we have an incredible responsibility. The first one is that we've got to make sure that we're the godly men that God called us to be. And there are a couple of verses that come to my mind significantly. The first one would be Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, where God says to us through the Apostle Paul, "Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, let each of you consider one another as more important than himself." What that's saying to me, Charles, is Dan's got to die. I've got to be dead to myself that I might be everything my wife and my children need.
That's good.
The other thing, Jesus in John chapter 13 said, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. And by this all men will know that you're my disciples, if you have love for one another." And what he's saying there is, Charles, I've got to love you, I've got to love Kathy, I've got to love my wife Candy and my children as Jesus has loved me. How did he love me? He died for me. And so we are warriors that God has called godly men to be for our wives, our children, our communities, that we have to be out there, out front. Not all men are joining this battle. When we have our meetings, sometimes it's just us girls. But it's time for us guys to stand and be bold, as God has called us to be bold, as Jesus was, as both the man who died for us individually and who loves us beyond our comprehension. So I know that I know that I know. And so in Deuteronomy, you're very familiar with the Shema, where we understand that God is God and we're to be His forever. And exactly after the Shema, after those series of verses, He says, you're going to teach them to your kids. You're going to put them on your doorpost. It's when you walk together. It's when you lie down. It's when you get up. It's when you have a sandwich. But many, many, many of us as men today have stepped back away from the responsibility of leadership, both in our homes and in our communities, and God forgive us, our children.
Well, that Bible study I told you about, that was one of the things on Alternate Our Hearts, is to, not just in our homes, but in the community. And the big one is, am I discipling my children and my wife in my home? And it's a challenge, and it's something that we have to do. I mean, you couldn't have said it better.
The second week in December, I went downtown Belton to go in a supply store to buy my annual computer. It's not my computer, it's my book that I live in to keep my schedule. I was getting out of my car and I saw I would say a 35 to 40-year-old man and probably a 16-year-old young lady walking down the street. And I know that I know that I know. I saw her countenance. I saw the dropping of her face. I saw the clothes that she wore, the tattoos that were on her, very much exposed skin. I saw him standing by her walking. I saw his attitude. I know that I know that I know. In those cases, you can call 911 and say, I'm seeing something that doesn't look right. But when you do that, you also need to call the 888-373-7888 and say, I'm seeing this, I'm giving you a license plate number, I'm giving you all the information I can give you because something's not right.
That's good.
And that lets us all do something significant to report.
And your gut won't lead you wrong.
Yes, sir.
You said something earlier, and I think we all think it sometimes, is it's just girls. And you said it happens to boys too.
Yes.
Speak more into that.
Well, I think as professionals in the area, trainers, we're learning what it takes to identify a boy. You know, the two boys I mentioned in that stat were sex trafficking victims. But boys can be exploited to be exploiters as well. We have recruiting happening in our middle schools, our high schools, and our college campuses right here locally. And one way that our kids are exploited, let's say a young man has a man who's taken an interest in him, perhaps from a gang, not necessarily, but this older man tries to teach him how to get a girl. And coaches him through how you ask her out and gifts you give her, and before he knows it, he may be asked at risk of losing that relationship with the older man, a relationship that's valuable to him because perhaps he doesn't have a father figure in his life. He is asked to bring that girl someplace and have her taken advantage of. And so without intending to originally, perhaps, I theorize, that boy is now in over his head. And so programs where we can train kids that they have other choices, whether they're being groomed to be an exploiter or whether they're being groomed to be exploited, I think is really important. Now, when it comes to identifying boys as sex trafficking victims, I honestly, personally do not have a lot of experience with that, and that's an area that I need to do more learning in. And I think as local agencies, we have a lot to learn in that area. Most often the boys will engage in what's called survival sex for food, shelter, clothing, those kinds of things.
Okay. Mr. Dan Kirkley, any final thoughts?
Yes, I do. We've talked about our children. And I think an interesting fact in the state of Texas is that the grooming of young girls, for example, the average age in the state of Texas is between the ages of 11 and 13. It's often a phenomenon that when these young people are rescued, as we heard the story of Natalie, they often return. And very often that's for protection of family. There's also a term, back in my day, we called it the Stockholm Syndrome, that you become a part of the family that your trafficker has created, and he will tell you that you'll get caught and put in jail or you'll be incarcerated. And so the term now used is trauma bonding, and the recidivism rate back and forth into the life is an average of 7 times before the person gets free. And another statistic that is tragic for all of us is that the life expectancy of a trafficked victim is 7 years.
Wow.
And that's why my call to men, to fathers, to become the godly men. If we are tempted by pornography, there is help available. Because pornography is progressive in its addictive nature, and so it's significant that the Polaris, the hotline that we've been given the number of, these things are important for us, because once you and I become truly the godly men that God calls us to be and walks the walk that Jesus Christ called us to walk in, we can be the warriors and the sustainers that God's called us to be.
Well, we're out of time, so I want to take this time, Kathy and Dan, to say thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for just bringing awareness to a community and to a nation, basically, that truly needs it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in tonight.